to grow the Gen3 community, to allow community members to get to know and to meet other Gen3 community members. Today and for the next 2 days, there'll be plenty of room for discussion. There'll be breakout sessions. There'll be Q&A. I hope everyone comes away from this knowing a little bit more about Gen3, knowing a little bit more how to connect to others in the Gen3 community, and knowing a little bit more how to contribute to the open source Gen3 project, or to the SOP that community members are building, or to the commons and meshes that people are building, or to the applications and use of the applications to further data science. So again, welcome. And we'll be talking throughout this about how you can continue to connect. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Bob. So I just wanted to run through our 4 aims, which you would have seen in the invitation you would have received a couple of months ago now. But really, we have 4 aims for this forum, and we're going to revisit these a few times through the event. So I think number 1 is that this is an opportunity for the Gen3 core team to share knowledge about the operations of Gen3, the roadmap, its architecture, the priorities, and how, I guess, the Gen3 team overall operates, and what the different teams do. And we're going to hear from Bob at the end of today's session on the Gen3 roadmap. Number 2 is really building stronger bridges and connections between the Gen3 core team and those, such as all of you who are here, who are building and operating and utilizing Gen3 platforms. Number 3 is around co-designing a set of ongoing community engagement activities. How can we better connect developers with the Gen3 team? And how can we ultimately make the Gen3 product and team more responsive to community needs? And number 4 is to start to work together on some shared development priorities between the Gen3 team and users, and how can we plan a way forward around that. So there are 4 ambitions. We'll be discussing those at a number of times through the event, and revisiting them at the end of the event as well. Next slide, please. Just a bit of code of conduct. So we are going to be strongly utilizing Slack over the next 3 days. So I'd encourage you to join the Slack channel if you haven't already, and it's been posted in the Zoom chat window here. How we want to operate is we'd really prefer everyone to post questions in the Slack channel. And then there will be moderators that are assigned to every single discussion that we're having over the next 3 days. They will pick up those questions, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask those questions here live in the Zoom session. As far as Zoom etiquette goes, please keep your microphone muted at all times, but encourage people to have their cameras on. As I said, questions will be asked by a moderator. So we'll use that process. And as I said, we encourage you to turn on video while you're speaking, and even when you're not speaking, around various topics. So great to see you all. Next slide. And back over to Bob. Thank you.
This session and the next session is to give everyone a sort of a look at the kinds of things that people are doing from around the world, building Gen3 commons and building Gen3 meshes. That's what we'll be doing in this session. And in the next session, we'll be looking at the way that groups from around the world are building Gen3 applications and using Gen3 workspaces, and sort of building what each of these different projects need for their particular set of research users. So this session, the next will be short videos. The videos will be available afterwards. The first video is from Dr. Sam Volkenbaum, a faculty member at the University of Chicago, and he's going to be describing the pediatric cancer data commons. We can launch that video now.
Cancer data commons. The PCDC has several goals. We want to be a hub across all pediatric cancer specialties, and we want to facilitate cross-disease research. We're working very hard to develop a common core data dictionary and a common governance structure for how the data are used. We're working to build an active international network of pediatric cancer researchers, and our goal is to educate, train, and increase data literacy of the pediatric oncology community. Data standards are at the key of everything we talk about. This is a very simple example of how different institutions might code male and female. And as you can see, if you collected data this way, it'd be very hard to combine those data sets together. So the PCDC really promotes the standardization of data by coming up with a consensus standard and then linking those to codes. In this case, these are codes from the National Cancer Institute's thesaurus. And here you can see that this code for male has a whole description with a link out to resources and to other parent and child concepts. As you can see, we're now working with 9 pediatric cancer specialties as well as cancer predisposition. We've established memoranda of understanding. We've engaged data contributors from all over the world. We are working hard to collect as many cases as we can. And of course, now that data are in the commons, those data are being used for analyses and for publishing papers. We work with groups from all over the world. Our goal is to establish connections with various pediatric cancer groups and to engage them to work with us to develop a common data dictionary and to share data. We've worked to put in data sharing and use agreements with groups both in the US and abroad, and we've worked very hard to conform to both HIPAA and GDPR requirements, allowing us to store data from partners all over the world. We now have over 27,000 cases in the pediatric cancer data commons between the INRG neuroblastoma commons and the Instruct rhabdomyosarcoma commons. More cases are coming all the time, and we hope that by the end of this year, we're going to have 100,000 cases in the PCDC. The PCDC consortium is a collection of these various cancer-specific consortia. We now have governance over all of the pediatric cancer consortia, and just this year we launched our scientific advisory committee, and next year we'll be launching our external advisory board. I'd like to show you how the cohort discovery tool works, and for this I'm going to demonstrate our Instruct data commons. The PCDC data portal is open to the public. Anyone can log in, and in this case search over the soft tissue sarcoma data. When you log in, you'll see the number of patients as well as filters that will allow you to do cohort discovery. Here we're looking at the Instruct data, patients that are alive, as well as patients who have botryoid rhabdomyosarcoma. This brings up a cohort of 318 patients. If we switch to alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma, and now we look at patients that have a FOXO1 PAX7 mutation, there are 539 patients that meet that criteria. We could then create a filter set and save that search so that we can come back to it later and load it up again or use it for further cohort discovery. Even more importantly, the cohort that was just discovered can be used to request data. The application is routed to the Consortium Executive Committee, and once approved, the PCDC releases the data to the researcher. This process saves weeks or even months compared to the prior way of requesting data. We hope to have all of our data commons in the same cohort discovery tool, so you'll be able to search over many different tumor types at the same time. One of the things we're really proud of is that the PCDC links to several other different types of data, including biospecimen availability and genomic data. A cohort you discover in the PCDC can be linked to the genomic data commons quite easily. In this case, the same cohort is brought up in the genomic data commons, showing you the same patients based on the COG USI. In the future, you'll be able to combine these data sets and analyze them together. We also are developing a whole suite of analytics tools and visualization capabilities for hypothesis generation. We're also establishing links with St. Jude Genomics Cloud and the Gabriella Miller Kids First Data Resource Center. Here are some examples of papers that were published in the last year from the neuroblastoma, soft tissue sarcoma, and germ cell tumor data commons. The PCDC is working across almost every cancer type, as you can see here, and we hope to fill in the gaps in the coming year. The PCDC is taking an active role in the Children's Cancer Data Initiative, As you can see here, there are many different groups that are stakeholders with children's cancer data, and the PCDC is working to connect to several of them to be part of this connected web of children's cancer data. The PCDC is also taking an active role in the development of the National Childhood Cancer Registry, or the NCCR. We're working to help take our standards and to help different cancer centers adopt those standards when it comes to their registry data. The PCDC is supported by a variety of resources. We have a lot of foundation funding that helps us keep going, and most recently we've been working under contract from the National Cancer Institute to help with their CCDI initiative. I hope that I showed you today that studying pediatric cancer requires collaboration and sharing, and a foundation of trust and consensus to build standards. We want to connect disparate types of data so that we can enrich research. These consensus standards are absolutely critical for the success of all our national and international data ecosystems, and it's going to allow us to aggregate data across trials and across diseases. And the earlier we adopt these data standards, the better the life cycle of data will be. It's going to help us accelerate progress and to help us discover new ways to diagnose and to treat pediatric cancer. If you want to learn more about the Pediatric Cancer Data Commons, you're welcome to contact me directly, and please sign up for our quarterly newsletter. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was a great example of how groups are using the Gen3 Data Commons to share data for, in this case, a worldwide community of pediatric cancer researchers. The next video, and again, these videos will be available afterwards. So if you missed any or want to revisit any of them, we'll be posting where they're available. The next talk is about the NCI HTAN project, the HTAN smart deployment. It will be done, it's from OHSU, and the speaker will be Brian Walsh, who I know is on the call today. So let's listen to the second video. This is a human tissue atlas, and it's a very exciting cancer project.
Hello, everybody. I'd like, first of all, to thank the University of Chicago for the Gen3 platform itself. It's a great product, and organizing this meeting and inviting us here to present. My name is Brian Walsh. I'm a software engineer who's been responsible for evangelizing Gen3 here at OHSU. We'd like to present to you today how we're leveraging Gen3 for a couple of projects locally here at OHSU, what we've done to support and extend it, and what we'd like to see enhanced in the platform. First of all is HTAN, the Human Tumor Atlas Network. We're using it internally to manage our own data sets. There's over 75,000 files, and we use them to coordinate the research and curate the data before it's uploaded to the data coordinating center. As you can see, the counts are a little bit different from other commons. There's comparatively few patients, many samples, and many analyses done on those specimens. Net, with 18 patients, there's over 500 specimens and over 73,000 files. Some of the unique features within Gen3 is that we've left the files in place on the HPC clusters. We're not using a bucket. The data dictionary is a high fidelity port of the HTAN RDF orientated data model. And as you can see, we've brought in the details, enumerations, and documentation, et cetera, field by field for all of the HTAN data model. The other thing that we're using Gen3 for is an initiative we're just getting started to create a data platform for ASTE. Some of the unique things about this is that the data will be maintained on premises in each one of the institutions. We're going to use a AWS implementation of Gen3 to support ASTE, and Minio or Ceph, other local S3 environments at each one of the institutions. Some of the unique features there is, like I said, the files are distributed across multiple buckets, and the data dictionary we will start with is a high fidelity port of fire research study and associated entities within the fire data model. Again, we brought it over in a high fidelity port with complete enumerations, documentations, etc. So the next way we've enhanced it under the Anvil platform is to create a utility that supports PFB. We extract the fire documents, in this case from the normalization work we did within Anvil, create a output PFB archive, and from there it can be imported into whatever platform supports it. We've run it through several test data sets, and that graph you see on the lower left reflects the commonly used entities, the fire entities within those platforms. And again, we brought the schema over in a high fidelity linked data type of way. What challenges we faced to date? Essentially, it's how to keep that pipe skinny. It can become quickly a little bit heavyweight, and we're always looking at ways to maximize the amount of work that's not done, keep things light in the interim. Some of the things we'd like to see, which we make great progress on very recently, is support for multiple buckets, reading and writing from multiple buckets. What we'd like to see is the client take more responsibility for the upload workflow. We'd like to see multi-bucket, multi-region support in terms of locating the DERS identifier that we'd like to download from. The tech stack itself needs a bit of update. I'd like to see perhaps something based on fire, but a stock default data model that's extensible, as opposed to recreating the wheel each time. And we'd really like to see less reliance on kind of the domain-specific languages or very involved configuration, specifically around tube, windmill, metadata, etc. That's it. Appreciate your time. Look forward to the discussion. Thanks for your attention.
Brian, that was a great introduction, and you also introduced some discussion topics that we may want to revisit on day 3. So thank you very much. That was extremely helpful. The next talk, we've had 2 talks so far about Gen3 Data Commons. A collection of multiple commons with other computational resources is a data mesh. And we're going to hear 2 talks in this session about Gen3 data meshes. The first one is the next talk on the NIH HEAL initiative, HEAL data platform. So let's hear that talk. I think this is will be by R.T. Venkat, Dr. Venkat, a U Chicago faculty member. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Aarti Venkat. I'm faculty in the Department of Medicine and the scientific lead for the Center for Translational Data Science at the University of Chicago. Today, I'm excited to talk to you about the HEAL data ecosystem. HEAL stands for Helping to End Addiction Long Term. Dr. Jessica Mezerich is the director of the ecosystem and is leading efforts to build and support a community around HEAL. A little bit of background on the history of data platforms and data ecosystems. So shown here on the left is original efforts on data sharing, like databases and data clouds that most of you are familiar with. Shown in the center is data commons. CTDS and Gen3 currently support 17 data commons, spanning more than 1 million patients. The next logical steps are data ecosystems or data meshes, and that's what we are talking about today. The HEAL data ecosystem is part of the NIH HEAL initiative, an aggressive trans-agency effort to speed scientific solutions to stem the national opioid public health crisis. As you all know, opioid overdose is a huge public health problem. The figure on the left is taken from NIDA, or National Institute on Drug Abuse. Opioid-involved overdose deaths rose from 21,000 in 2010 to 47,000 in 2017, and you can see that it remained steady for a few years, but it rose sharply to 68,000 in 2020. The goal of the HEAL data ecosystem is to accelerate sharing HEAL-generated data and results among the broad community of researchers, healthcare providers, community leaders, policymakers, and other HEAL stakeholders who can benefit from learning the results of an initiative research. The HEAL data platform is a data ecosystem that promotes data sharing. So the platform provides a secure way to authenticate and authorize. So only authorized users can download and analyze data in secure workspaces. A unique feature of the platform is study registration. Here, researchers or data submitters can register their study and submit study level metadata to the platform. This makes HEAL a very unique platform in that it collects metadata from individual users. The platform itself does not store data. Instead, researchers can submit their data to any of the HEAL-funded repositories supported with FAIR APIs, which are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable APIs. The platform then interoperates with these data repositories. The users of HEAL, as you can imagine, are HEAL-funded investigators and their research team. It's also the broader research community that is interested in the opioid overdose crisis. We have journalists, the various stakeholders, such as healthcare providers and patients, community partners, public health professionals, and policymakers. HEAL is very unique because the Congress is really involved with HEAL, and that represents the broadest possible range of users. Indeed, there is a huge push and support for science-based solutions to the opioid crisis. Another unique aspect of HEAL is the translational nature of data. So here I'm showing you a bubble diagram, and bubble size in this image is proportional to the amount of data from that category. You can see here that data ranges from basic research on animal behavior to genetics, clinical studies, and drug candidate assays. This shows you the whole spectrum of data types from bench to bedside. The platform itself has several special features. One feature is the HEAL Metadata Service, or MDS, which is a core Gen3 framework service. As I alluded to earlier, the platform enables individual users to request access to register a study, to register the study, and to enter study level metadata. The HEAL MDS is then updated with this registration information. This makes it very unique, as the MDS now provides an API to retrieve this registration information and other metadata at the study level. So this increases the discoverability and accessibility of studies to other researchers. The other feature of the HEAL data platform is the aggregate MDS, or AG-MDS. The AG-MDS pulls metadata from dozens of repositories, each having varying capabilities in their APIs, and it loads this aggregate metadata in an Elasticsearch cache for fast search and discovery on the platform. There are several other special features, some of which are listed here. We have a data portal, which provides filtering based on keywords or tags, or you can even use a free text search to search for your study. Harmonization of data and metadata is a big one. The HEAL platform provides schemas that researchers can use to harmonize their metadata, and this harmonized information is then made available to researchers, and that just supports reproducible research. A secure login page is available to authenticate users prior to accessing the data. secure workspaces for authorized users. As I mentioned earlier, workspaces are also highly configurable to project requirements. Researchers can import selected data sets to the workspace for analysis. And there's also a persistent drive that they can use to store code and intermediate files even after they terminate the workspace session. So that is very handy. So to conclude, the HEAL data platform is a leading example of a data ecosystem that is designed to serve an entire research community. The platform interoperates with dozens of data repositories, provides a single unified search and discovery place for data access and analysis, and it makes use of latest Gen3 technologies, some of which I mentioned in this talk, such as the MDS, AgMDS, workspaces with Strides integration, and so on. The HEAL initiative has an aggressive data sharing policy, and the HEAL data platform is expected to get enormous data sharing going. This is a great way for the platform to help NIH implement their own data sharing guidelines about the opioid crisis, which continues to be a big public health problem. This was a lightning presentation on HEAL. I hope you enjoyed hearing about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Dr. Venkat is also on the participating today in the meeting. The next video is describing the Australian Cardiovascular Disease Commons. This is one of several projects in Australia that we'll be hearing about. So let's move to that video next.
Shadbolt. I'm the Human Genomics Data Specialist at the Australian Biocommons. I'm here to talk to you about the Australian Cardiovascular Disease Data Commons that we have created using Gen3 software. For a bit of background, heart attack is the biggest cause of premature cardiovascular death in Australia, and it's a major driver of disability. However, many patients will have had no warning symptoms before a heart attack. Cardiovascular disease researchers are generating vast amounts of omics data to try to understand the mechanisms of disease and discover new warning signals to improve patient outcomes. And if we were able to bring together all of this data from different research projects, integrating it and reanalyzing it will give researchers more power to uncover new insights into cardiovascular disease and provide new weapons in the quest for zero heart attacks. The problem is there isn't anywhere for Australian cardiovascular disease researchers to put their data in a way that makes it easy to harmonize and share, so that reanalysis and integration of the data can happen. The data are from a range of different cohorts and study types and have been collected with different methods and different clinical and demographic information standards. The data are also generated via different protocols such as genomic sequencing, lipidomic, and metabolomic profiling, as well as imaging data. So without a place to bring all the data together in a harmonized platform, the task of integration and reanalysis is very challenging. At the Australian Biocommons, we were approached by the Cardiovascular Disease Collaboration to pilot a platform to bring this data together. And given our knowledge and experience with Gen3, we recommended establishing a data commons using Gen3. So our main aims for this 6-month pilot project were to bring together the CAD Frontiers collaboration, establish a Gen3 data commons on Amazon Web Services within the Australian Amazon region, as well as developing a harmonized data dictionary to capture all the relevant fields about the studies, establishing institutional authentication for the platform, as well as testing the security of the platform through penetration testing, and defining data access processes through a data governance committee. In this pilot phase, we focused on 3 cohorts with a total of 26,000 individuals, where the data types covered structured clinical and demographic metadata, as well as genomic, lipidomic, proteomic, and metabolomic data files. Once fully funded, we expect to populate the platform over the next 4 years with 15 further cohorts for a total of 400,000 individuals, again covering clinical and demographic metadata, as well as a range of data types. The main use cases for the platform are all around data sharing. We want to enable the existing consortium members who have contributed their data to collaborate and share data between them so that they can integrate and reanalyze this data. But we also want to make this data more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable for the wider cardiovascular disease research community, particularly in Australia, but also around the world. Having the data harmonized within the commons will also facilitate integration with large international datasets, such as Biodata Catalyst. So now I wanted to show you the platform that we have set up. So I'll see you over there. Okay, so here we are on the homepage of our Gen3 portal, and you can probably recognize the interface. We've made a few small edits to some of the titles and descriptions, but other than that, it's a pretty standard Gen3 interface. So by going to the Data Dictionary Explorer, you can see a lot of the work we did for the project was coming up with this customized data dictionary that would cover all the relevant fields for the data studies that we were putting into the platform. We tried to model this quite closely on the Biodata Catalyst data dictionary because we see that as a key international repository that we'd want to align with, but we also did expand some of the types of files that we are putting in because we had different file types than go into the Biodata Catalyst repository. Another feature of the platform that we set up was the Study Explorer. And this was important for us because we needed a way of showing users that were not yet authorized to access these studies fully, that they had some way of finding out more about the studies and really understanding whether it was worth going through that data access process. So we created the Study Explorer to summarize all the structured metadata that's in our portal so that users can see the number of individuals with various metadata aspects, and then they can decide whether they want to apply for the study. Another feature that we've implemented in our system is that logging in can occur through CI Logon. And that basically allows users to use an existing identity provider, such as ORCID, or through any of a number of existing institutes to log into the system. And once logged into the system, if you do have access to view studies, you'll be able to explore them via the Data Explorer. For users that do not yet have access to studies, they're able to go to the Study Explorer and use these data access URLs to apply for access. And access is granted through the co-managed platform that's attached to CI Logon. And we've automated the process that then grants access to the users through an object relational mapper that was written by my colleague Uwe Winter. This automatically will update the user YAML that is required to give access to projects through the Gen3 platform. So now I'll head back to the slides and talk a little bit more about our experience with setting up. Okay, so first I wanted to talk a bit about what we felt went well on the project. So one step we did after we had set up a basic instance of Gen3 was to do a round of user testing with the people that were going to use the platform and take them through a few simple tests. And this enabled us to get some really great feedback, and we were able to make some tweaks and changes where we could to improve the portal for our users. And we really thought this was a valuable process. Within our Biocommons team, specifically Uwe Winter and I, we were able to develop tools that helped ease the process of data dictionary creation and user authorization update automation through some Python and Bash scripts. And this really helped us save some time in the long run when we needed to quickly iterate while we were developing the platform. Implementing the Study Explorer was a really important step for us as well, because it really fulfilled that user need to understand what was in the platform before they got access to the specific cohorts. And undertaking a security audit by an external company really taught us a lot about the AWS setup and ways we could improve the security of the platform that house this sensitive human data. In terms of some of the challenges, I think we underestimated how much time and effort was needed to sort out the data governance issues. The cohorts that we were trying to onboard into our platform were consented much earlier and were not really necessarily consented for the type of data sharing that now is expected of researchers. So there's quite a lot of legal and ethical things to work through to make sure that we're fulfilling the right responsibilities in terms of how we manage this data. There was a bit of a learning curve in terms of understanding how all the different pieces of Gen3 fit together. And we also discovered a few issues in terms of the AWS regions that are hard-coded into the software. So we worked with the Gen3 developers to help improve that and enable people outside of the US to set up the software within the region of their choice. We found some documentation was a bit difficult to follow for some of the features, particularly the metadata service and study explorer, but we're hoping we can help improve that into the future. In terms of what we would love to see for the platform going forward, we had some requests from our collaborators that they'd really like finer grained access control for elements within a project. For example, only granting access to certain samples within a project that may have particular consent codes, perhaps also only granting access to variables that were requested by a user, and also different file types within a project. We've also had requests to have more detailed exploration of things such as genomic variants or different lipid species, but we don't think the Gen3 platform has really been set up to enable that kind of exploration of fields that may have thousands of different variables to explore. Having a more configurable portal would be great, because we found sometimes we wanted to adjust certain aspects of the portal, but these were not configurable via the GitOps configuration file. So having more control over that would be great. And from our side, we're still working on trying to integrate with various analysis platforms such as Terra and Cavatica, and we're still trying to figure out the best ways for doing that. So lastly, I'd like to acknowledge the entire project team that were part of this pilot project, and thank you for your time.
The next one. So first of all, I think you could already see how each of these projects can take the open source platform and then make it fit for what they need in a way that works for them. And how creative different groups are in how they do that. Part of this meeting is to expose each group to what some of the other groups are doing and work out processes to bring their innovations more rapidly back into the core system. The next project is from the IBD Genetics Consortium. It's a commons for the IBD Genetics Consortium project, and Phil Shum from the University of Chicago will be narrating the video. So let's turn to the next video, please.
Bowel Disease Genetics Consortium Data Commons, a Gen3 data commons funded by the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases. The IBD Consortium started in 2002 in order to study the genetic determinants of inflammatory bowel disease, which includes both Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. The consortium was refunded again this year for another 5 years. It consists of 7 genetic research centers in the US and Canada, plus a data coordinating center. And together with the International IBD Genetics Consortium, the consortia have identified approximately 250 independent IBD loci and dozens of causal variants. The international consortia is currently completing a GWAS meta-analysis of over 75,000 IBD-affected individuals from 33 cohorts. The objectives of the data commons are as follows: to store and distribute all of the data collected by both the NIDDK and international consortia, to permit exploration of the data, including creation of virtual cohorts for study planning, to facilitate collaborative and reproducible analyses by consortium members, and to distribute data products to the larger research community, thereby adding value to data already distributed through dbGaP and the NIDDK Central Repository. The Gen3 IBD Commons permits the DCC to manage the data from both consortia in a highly efficient manner. The Commons intended users are members of each of the consortia, including PIs and analysts, informaticians at the individual sites, and the research coordinators responsible for collecting and managing a lot of the data. Also, collaborators of the consortium, collaborators on consortium projects, NIH grant award recipients of ancillary grants for the consortia, and the laboratories that store and analyze consortium samples, and finally, the broader research community. The IBD Commons has a broad range of data available, including meta and phenotypic data corresponding to samples in a sample repository established by the consortia and located within the NIDDK Central Repository, large chip-based and sequencing genotype data sets, RNA-seq data both from serum and from intestinal biopsies, detailed clinical and sample information, including longitudinal data from clinically focused studies. Most recently, single-cell data are beginning to come online, and finally, data products attached to specific published papers. The IBD Data Commons now includes individual level data on more than 100,000 research participants. And here is an example of some analysis of single-cell data from a recent paper by Martin et al. Comparing inflamed to uninflamed tissue. These data are available in the Commons, and there is a notebook that allows users to replicate the analyses. The IBD Data Commons includes many specific features, unique or special features. This includes the fact that there is substantial overlap in participants across projects. Many research participants have been included in projects over the full 20 years. And to address this, we have a separate Gen3 project that exclusively contains information about participants and their samples and can be queried. Over the life of a project, there are many versions of data products, and we make use of the versioning features of Index D to accommodate that. We also have quite a bit of file-specific permissioning throughout the life of a project, from the early stages in which users can only get access to their own data through QC and analysis, when users can access, within the consortium, can access data from other sites, all the way through publication, when summary statistics and analytic files become available to the broader community. And we also have quite a heterogeneous set of users, and we accommodate file and data submissions from all of them. The IBD Commons makes use of a lot of new Gen3 features, and one of those is the Gen3 requester service. This is what we use to handle access requests for data. Users make an access request through the Gen3 requester service, at which point they are rerouted to an access request form in REDCap. After that's completed, the information goes to an administrator within the DCC, who is then able to either approve or deny the request. And the Gen3 requester service makes the required changes within Arborist so that the user can then access the data for which they are approved. I mentioned earlier that the Commons also interoperates with dbGaP and with the NIDDK Central Repository. Samples collected by the consortium, as well as some of its data, are available through the NIDDK Central Repository. And consistent with NIH requirements, all of the genome-wide genotype data are available through dbGaP. Both of those institutions receive additional phenotypic and metadata from the Commons to add value to those data sets, and then users may use those. And going forward, we are looking to modify the Commons so that it can interoperate directly with data that are stored in the NIDDK Central Repository and in dbGaP, thereby permitting users who have applied and received access to those data sets to be able to pull them directly into a Gen3 workspace and compute over them. So in conclusion, the NIDDK IBD Genetics Consortium Data Commons plays a key role in the management and distribution of data on the genetics of inflammatory bowel disease worldwide. The Commons is making use of the latest Gen3 technologies, and the IBD Data Commons is accessible via the Biomedical Research Hub, which you will hear about in another presentation during this meeting.
Thank you. We've heard about several commons, including the Australian Cardiovascular Disease Commons and just the IBD Genetics Consortium Commons that Phil Schum just described. We're going to turn for the last presentation of this session to a data mesh. That's when you have multiple commons and computational platforms and perhaps knowledge bases all coming together through the Gen3 mesh services to create a data ecosystem. And we're going to hear about one of these, a joint project with AWS called the Biomedical Research Hub. This will be done by Chris Meyer from the University of Chicago. Thank you. Let's start this one.
Chris Meyer with the Center for Translational Data Science at the University of Chicago. In this video, I'll provide a brief demonstration of the Biomedical Research Hub, which is a Gen3 data ecosystem. In addition to facilitating the creation of data commons, the Gen3 software stack includes tools and services that empower the creation of data ecosystems or data meshes. Gen3 data ecosystems consist of an interconnected network of data resources that are integrated by utilizing a common set of software services called the Gen3 Framework Services. These services support the emergence of data ecosystems by empowering data resources to interoperate through providing common protocols for user authentication and authorization, data indexing, and metadata services. In a healthy data ecosystem, one finds searchable metadata originating from multiple data commons, data repositories, knowledge bases, and other sources of data, alongside cloud-based exploration and analysis tools, including data portals, workspaces, platforms for large-scale processing of data, Jupyter notebooks, and other applications. Unlike data commons, which typically operate with the full suite of services for structured data import and export, and usually employ a data model for harmonization of ingested data sets, in data meshes, data ownership is decentralized, meaning the data sets that one can discover in a Gen3 data mesh are stored and managed by a federated team of independent and interoperable data resources. The Biomedical Research Hub, or BRH, is a cloud-based and multifunctional web interface that provides a secure environment for discovery and analysis of scientific results and data in the biomedical domain. It is designed to serve users with a variety of objectives, backgrounds, and specialties. The BRH represents a dynamic data ecosystem because it aggregates and hosts metadata from multiple resources to make data discovery and access easy for users. This means that instead of ingesting files or metadata directly into a data warehouse owned by the BRH utilizes the APIs of FAIR repositories, including multiple Gen3 data commons, to aggregate biomedical study data stored in multiple independent repositories in a centralized location. The BRH platform then exposes those aggregated metadata to search and analysis tools to provide an easy way for users to discover data spread across multiple independent resources. As a Gen3 data mesh, the BRH platform provides a way to search and query over study metadata and diverse data types, including the use of free text search and study keyword tags that can be used as filters. For example, in the BRH, one can use the data commons tag that denotes which repository the data belong to in order to filter the table of studies. One can also begin typing text into the search box to filter the studies. Again, these study metadata are generated, curated, and maintained by different projects and organizations and stored across multiple secure repositories. The BRH utilizes their FAIR APIs to aggregate study metadata and provides a platform of search and analysis tools for discovering and exploring these data sets. The Gen3 metadata service provides the required APIs for storing and querying the schema list study metadata, which means that aggregated metadata don't need to follow any predefined structure. Instead, study metadata, which can include a manifest of data GUIDs or file object identifiers, are aggregated using custom adapters written for each repository. And it is the configuration of the discovery page of the Gen3 data portal service that provides the structure for displaying the metadata in a table for perusing and filtering via free text and keyword searches. The study metadata in BRH are available for the general public to browse. However, only authorized users can access the associated file objects and structured or clinical data. After authenticating in the BRH data portal, the user can review their access privileges to various connected data resources on their profile page. When browsing study metadata on the main discovery page, a lock can be seen in the data availability column of the study table that represents a user's access privileges for each study. One can also click on a study to see a message about their privileges to access that study. If a user has access to a study discovered in the table of results and that study has files associated with it, then a user can check the checkbox by the study to create a file download manifest for accessing the files. The manifest file can be downloaded locally, or it can be exported to the secure BRH workspace so files can be accessed in the cloud. The BRH offers a secure and cost-effective cloud computing environment for data analysis, empowering collaborative research and development of new analytical tools. This environment is called the Gen3 workspace and can be accessed by clicking on the workspace icon in the navigation bar if a user has applied for an account using Strides credits or grants. Initially, on the workspace page, a user is confronted with a choice of workspace flavors to select from, with different tools installed and different levels of compute and storage resources. After launching a workspace, a persistent personal drive is mounted to the workspace VM, where a user can download files via any exported manifests, upload their own files, and save their work, including any Jupyter or R notebooks. In order to help jumpstart analyses in the BRH workspace, the Gen3 team has created several tutorial notebooks that can be browsed on the example analysis page, which can be accessed by clicking the button in the top navigation bar. The examples on this page are displayed as fully executed static HTML versions. If a user is using the workspace, users can launch a tutorial workspace that comes preloaded with all the tutorial notebooks in a single place. Users are encouraged to try out these tutorials and to make copies of the notebooks and modify them for their own purposes. Thanks for watching this brief introduction to the Biomedical Research Hub, a Gen3 data mesh that aims to accelerate novel discoveries through empowering users to find data across the biomedical research data ecosystem.
Well, that's the last of the presentations in this session on data commons and data meshes to show you some of the different things that you could do with the open source Gen3 system. So please take about a 10-minute break and we'll come back in about 10 minutes, about 17 minutes after the hour. What we heard in the last session were, what we saw in the last session were examples of Gen3 data commons and Gen3 data meshes, but we really didn't see they were mentioned, but we didn't see active use of workspaces. These are easy. I think everyone has used Jupyter Notebooks and Jupyter Hub. It's quite easy to do this in the Gen3 ecosystem, but you can also integrate a lot of other applications, from maps to genome browsers to variant databases, et cetera. Talk will be how you can bring, showing an example of how you can bring third-party applications very easily into Gen3. We just saw in the last talk how Gen3 was integrated with a number of other systems. And in this talk, we're going to see for an imaging data commons called MIDRIC, which supports DICOM, a US standard for, a standard for medical images, how we can integrate a DICOM viewer into a Gen3 into a Gen3 data commons. So why don't we start the next video.
My name is Chris Meyer, and in this video, I'll be introducing the integration of the OHIF DICOM image viewer into the MIDRIC Data Commons Explorer application. The Medical Imaging Data Resource Center, or MIDRIC, is a multi-institutional collaborative initiative driven by the medical imaging community and is aimed at accelerating the transfer of knowledge and innovation in the current COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. MIDRIC, funded by the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering and hosted at the University of Chicago, is co-led by the American College of Radiology, the Radiological Society of North America, and the American Association of Physicists in Medicine. The aim of MIDRIC is to foster machine learning innovation through data sharing for rapid and flexible collection, analysis, and dissemination of imaging and associated clinical data by providing researchers with unparalleled resources in the fight against COVID-19. The Gen3 data portal service, used to create a browser-based user interface for the MIDRIC data commons, features a built-in data exploration tool. The exploration tool features faceted search for selecting subsets of data and buttons for downloading structured data and file download manifests. In the MIDRIC data commons, users can select subsets of imaging studies based on patient demographic data, standard DICOM attributes, harmonized study descriptions, and temporal proximity to COVID-19 test results. Since the imaging studies, by their very nature, contain images, researchers may want to preview images before downloading for further analysis. So, to facilitate previewing images, we have integrated the OHIF DICOM viewer in the MIDRIC data exploration application. MIDRIC users can now select subsets of imaging studies using faceted search, then click on a button by each imaging study in the table of results that will launch the OHIF viewer in their browser in order to preview images in that study. The Open Health Imaging Foundation, or OHIF, viewer is an open source web-based medical imaging platform. The viewer is designed to load large radiology studies as quickly as possible, retrieving metadata ahead of time and streaming in pixel data as needed. The viewer leverages Cornerstone 3D JavaScript libraries for decoding, rendering, and annotating medical images, and it works out of the box with image archives that support DICOM Web, which is a family of RESTful DICOM services designed for sending, retrieving, and querying medical images and related information. The viewer's user interface is designed with extensibility in mind, and UI components are available in a reusable component library built with React.js and Tailwind CSS. Each imaging study can contain one or more imaging series, and when the viewer is launched, the series in the study can be browsed in the left side panel toggled with the series button. Each series may consist of a single image, as is typical for X-rays, or as in the case of CT scans, may be so-called stacks of image slices that can be together interpreted as a three-dimensional image. Stacks of images can be scrolled through with the arrow keys, and other image display properties, including but not limited to zoom, contrast, and exposure, can be manipulated with a mouse click and drag. The OHIF viewer also features image annotation tools that can be used to add a textual annotation or calculate distance or angles between features on the image. Finally, the viewer has a built-in DICOM tag viewer where users can review the image's embedded metadata. I hope you enjoyed this brief video demonstrating the integration of the OHIF DICOM image viewer in the Midrick Data Commons Explorer application. Thanks for watching.
That's a great example of how you can bring in third-party applications and integrate them into Gen3. I think each of these projects has to, if they work with biomedical data, they have to bring in their own governance and compliance and often fair care and related types of frameworks. And we've heard how some of these projects have done it. There is some, another example of that will be the subject of the next talk. And this will be from Urvi Sheth from the Open Commons Consortium, not-for-profit that helps people build data commons and data meshes. So let's hear about that. Let's hear the next talk.
Of automatic governance process for Gen3 data commons by OCC. Today, we would be taking a walkthrough into the web-based solution developed to automate the governance process. My name is Urvi Sheth, and I'm Senior Software Engineer at Open Commons Consortium. Before we dive into the presentation, let me give you a short background on OCC. OCC, or Open Commons Consortium, is 510(c)(3) non-for-profit. We believe that data sharing can not only help the community to get better results, but it also makes you friends. Following this motto, OCC provides and manages Data Commons, which is a software platform that brings together the data in cloud computing with application and services to create resource for research community. Data Mashfish, which is decentralized management of Gen3 data sources by using Gen3 microservice APIs. Data Commons Governance, in which OCC provides the legal agreement and governance structure to get access to Gen3 resources for research and development purposes. The governance structure for Gen3 data commons at OCC includes the process of onboarding users and organization by completing appropriate legal documentation, security and privacy training, and payment information. To overcome the cumbersomeness of the process of current governance, OCC developed a cloud-agnostic platform called Automatic Governance, or AG for short. AG enhances user experience through the governance process by streamlining the onboarding of user to a data commons while providing continuous compliance. To begin the process of governance, a user can access the automatic governance portal with secure passwordless access. AG's authentication process is based on token-based mechanism, which allows any users to start onboarding process. As seen in this video, user would enter their email address, which would generate a unique 6-digit code, which is sent via email. After entering the token into the enter token box on the portal, user can access the portal. Once the request is received for a resource in Gen3, AG allows the governance workflow to process the request. The workflow of AG platform is divided into 4 steps, which are explained in the presentation later. For each of the steps, we have 4 statuses at a time. When the request is not processed yet, the box of the status on UI would have black colored box. Once the request is processing, the color changes to yellow. For any accepted stage, the border color would change to green. And for all rejected statuses, it would show the red colored border. For each and every stage and status change, user is notified via email. The first step in the AG workflow is submit access request. In this step, credibility of user is checked by OCC admin as an initial pass for the access request submitted. The screenshot here shows how the status page would look like. Currently, the status is processing for submit access request box. This status is set to processing as soon as the request is made. The instructions on the side have information on what is happening and what to expect in this stage. Currently, the user request has been submitted. Admin is reviewing user's request, and user will be notified via email once the status is changed. Once the admin approves the initial access request for a user, the workflow moves to the next step, which is eDoc processing. This step triggers the process of sending user the DocuSign document for legal agreements to be completed via email. As shown here on the status page, the second step is turned to processing. This stage was initialized because the initial request is approved by admin and DocuSign document is sent to user via email. Once this document is completed by user, OCC admin would receive a notification for review. Once the agreement is reviewed and approved, the user would be onboarded to the next step. The next step in the procedure is to submit the documents supporting the completion of user security training. OCC is Security Compliance Organization, and our governance structure emphasis on finishing a security training, which can be organization specific or NIH training. AG not only helps to implement those security practices, but it can accommodate tracking of the continuous compliance from the same workflow. As shown in the video, there is a form present in which user needs to upload their document related to completion of their security training. Here, I'm uploading an image for demonstration. Once it is uploaded, OCC admin would be notified to review it, and the status on the UI would change to uploaded. On successful review, the status changes to accepted and the workflow moves to the next stage, which is received approval. In this stage, OCC would gather the payment information from user or organization. Apart from this, OCC admin does the final checks for the access request. This is how all approved request access would look like. Once approved, user would be onboarded to Gen3 automatically. User would be notified via email once the Gen3 credentials are set up. For future roadmap of 2023, AG will provide user cost summary reports, which will enable real-time cost utilization for users while providing payment services through users' direct pay or credit. The list of technologies which are used are WordPress plugin like WP Forms and many more for front-end UI. AWS Lambda, AWS Cognito, and AWS API Gateway for managing microservices responsible for connecting AG with other applications. We are using Salesforce Contact as backend, and we are using DocuSign e-signature Salesforce app with DocuSign to connect to Salesforce, DocuSign, and AG. And lastly, we are using Gen3 API to create the user credential and permission once the request is approved. OCC run and manages AG, but we can also set up automatic governance for your environment with customized workflow for the governance process. For additional information, please contact info@occ-data.org. Thank you.
Thank you. For various historical reasons, the default data model in Gen3 is a graph data model implemented with Postgres. It's a roadmap activity to support other data models, and that includes FHIR. What we're going to see in the next video is the use of an OMOP data model from the Odyssey Atlas open source OMOP project. And this is in support of large-scale GWAS for over 600,000 individuals that we're going to see in the next slide, in the next presentation. So please start the next one. This is by Kyle Hernandez.
Hello, my name is Kyle Hernandez, and I am a research assistant professor at the University of Chicago. And today I'm going to talk about the VA Data Commons. The VA Data Commons supports the research and analysis of U.S. military veteran medical and genomic data and aims to accelerate scientific discovery and development of therapies, diagnostic tests, and other technologies for improving the lives of veterans and beyond. The VA Data Commons has a large amount of electronic health records, or EHR. This comes from VA's rich clinical data, very large scale. This database is filled with things like lab tests, prescriptions, visits, procedures, etc. There's expertise needed to describe cohorts. For example, trying to describe, say, a type 2 diabetes cohort. There's lots of discoveries that can be made with EHR alone. In addition, things like genetic information also have a lot of power. The Million Veterans Program, or MVP, has rich genetic data. It is a national research program to learn how genes, lifestyle, and military exposures affect health and illness. Since they launched in 2011, there have been over 900,000 veteran partners joining the MVP program. In order to do these kind of analyses, you need a complex understanding of genetics, statistics, and bioinformatics. Also, these studies require lots of computational power. Really, to make some of these large, high-impact discoveries, you need to really combine the electronic health records with the genetic information. By combining these, you can really ask things and understand things about mechanisms underlying complex diseases and traits, things like cardiovascular disease, blood pressure, PTSD, and more. The MVP has empowered 100+ publications. We really hope to also build a synergy between the clinical data and genetics data. Both clinical and genetics data have complex and unique domain-specific challenges. This can lead to some lower quality statistical models, as well as some limited reproducibility. For example, the way you described your cohort of type 2 diabetes may be very different than the way that another investigator described type 2 diabetes in their cohort. We have tried to build the synergy by integrating some open source tools into our data commons, like Odyssey's Atlas, which can be used to generate cohorts based on the clinical EHR data. In addition, we have a web application that can help detect associations between genetic information and clinical variables, also known as a genome-wide association study, or GWAS. The Gen3 platform allows us to integrate these utilities and help to break down some of these barriers. How this would work in the VA Data Commons would be something like an authorized user coming in, selecting the Odyssey Atlas application. Through that application, they can define or build one or more cohorts based on their outcome of interest. Let's say it's, for example, type 2 diabetes, a case cohort, as well as a normal control cohort. After the investigator has defined these cohorts, they would go into the GWAS app. And within the GWAS app, you can select some of these cohorts that you created. You can then add other clinical variables like, for example, age or biological sex, set up some parameters for the GWAS analysis itself, and then submit a GWAS job through the VA Data Commons. Once the GWAS job completes, the investigator can look at some of the outcomes. An example of your basic outcome from a GWAS would be a plot like this, called a Manhattan plot, showing significant associations between genotypes and your phenotype of interest. this kind of results can then lead to new discoveries. For example, you might find a new gene associated that wasn't described before. This could also build some new hypotheses. Maybe you see some kind of association that also is related to some kind of disease that's similar to the one that you're studying, and maybe there could be some interesting interactions between the two. It also could serve as just further validation of some known associations, but from a completely different cohort. This kind of work could then lead the investigator to either go back to describe either a new cohort, or maybe just refine the model they did to maybe be a little more rigorous or add some more additional covariates and run the job again. The Gen3 platform allows us to break down some of these barriers and improve the access to data while maintaining a high standard for security and patient privacy. This is extremely important. We care deeply about security and patient privacy as does the VA and the MVP program. Because of this, we hope that we'll be able to make more discoveries that will improve veterans' health and lives in the long run. The VA Data Commons currently is working with testing groups and gathering important feedback to reduce some of the barriers between genetics experts and clinical data experts, as I went over previously. In addition, we have some unique features like integration of open source software like Odyssey Atlas for defining cohorts based on VA clinical data, as well as Argo to run computational intensive GWAS workflows at scale. Some upcoming features include configuring an application for the interactive exploration of GWAS results right in the Gen3 Data Commons portal itself. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next talk is just showcasing some of the types of visualizations that are common and easy to do with Jupyter Notebooks connected to Gen3 Commons. And this, I think it's going to be done by Phil Shum. So why don't we, it's with a project, a Gen3 data commons called JCoin that he'll describe to you.
My name is Phil Shum, and I'm going to tell you about the Justice Community Opioid Innovation Network, or JCoin Data Commons, a Gen3 data commons funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. JCoin was launched in 2018 and funded through NIH's Helping to End Addiction Long-Term Initiative. The network is intended to advance scientific knowledge of effective policies, practices, and interventions for preventing and treating opioid use disorder in justice settings. The network consists of 13 clinical research centers, also known as research hubs, a methodology and advanced analytics resource center, and a coordination and translation center. The objectives of the JCoin Data Commons, or JDC, are to permit the sponsor to monitor accrual and composition of study participants, to store and distribute the data collected by the research hubs, as well as other JCoin-sponsored studies, to facilitate collaborative and reproducible analyses within the network, and finally, to interoperate with the HEAL data platform in order to share data with the broader research community in compliance with the HEAL data sharing policy. You'll note that the Gen3-based JDC actually provides many of the features of a typical data coordinating center, in addition to its data storage and archiving, sharing, and compute functions. The intended users of the JDC are the JCoin members. These include the hub PIs and their research teams, a number of other JCoin-funded investigators, and early career scholars. The NIDA leadership, to be able to monitor what is going on and progress of the studies, and then finally with the broader research community. The JDC has a very broad range of data types, and these include baseline and longitudinal data from the research hubs. JCoin created a set of CDEs at the outset, and those are collected by all of the research hubs. Data from sub-studies performed by one or more hubs. An example of this is a social network study over time that is going on in a subset of the hubs. Data resources generated by the MARC and the CTC, for example, geographically linked data sets that can be used in conjunction with other data and national surveys. Data from historical and other related studies collected by JCoin investigators. And then finally, a number of other related data sets funded by NIDA, such as the Prescription Drug Abuse Policy System, or PDAPS. Accrual to the research hubs is now underway, as you can see here, the front page of the JDC. The JDC has a number of special features. These include the following. The first is the need to accommodate regular, at least quarterly, submissions of data from all of the hubs, updating but preserving previous versions of those data sets. The need to accommodate not only the common data elements shared across the hubs, but also data from several studies, as I mentioned before. The need to provide the ability to explore core measures aggregated across hubs for the purpose of planning and exploring the possibility for collaborative analyses. This is implemented via a customized application running within a workspace that authorized users may access. And then finally, the need to accommodate use of data by a variety of software packages. JCoin is a very multidisciplinary network, and consequently, you have people used to working in Stata, R, SAS, and SPSS. And that is accommodated by providing data packages with data sets in each of those formats to facilitate use. Data submissions occur according to a rather specific sort of workflow that allows the commons to do a lot with a little. On the left, you see the research hub, and they're generating data. And we have provided a software package called the JDC Utilities, which include functions for replacing IDs with centralized identifiers, doing date shifting according to a standardized algorithm, and then also being able to validate data submissions before they're actually submitted according to schema, JSON schema. And this allows, all of this allows a hub, a research hub, to get their data submissions ready locally, de-identify them, do everything they have to do, and verify that they've prepared them properly before they actually go ahead and submit them to the commons, at which time they are packaged in a form of a frictionless data package. These are standard packages across all of the hubs to facilitate combining data across hubs. These packages are stored in object storage, and as I mentioned before, we make heavy use of IndexedD's versioning feature. I mentioned before that the platform interoperates with something called the Heal Data platform, which is actually built on Gen3 technology itself. To do that, the JDC includes the Gen3 metadata service. Those metadata then are aggregated within the Heal Data platform, and they allow a user of the platform to search and discover JCoin data sets. Beyond that, users of the Heal platform are able to request authorization through the JDC, and if they are authorized, then copy data into the HEAL data platform, into a workspace where they may securely analyze those data. In conclusion, the Jcoin Data Commons, or JDC, represents an innovative use of Gen3, serving not only data sharing and compute functions, but also data monitoring and management functions. The JDC includes a broad range of data types, including detailed social scientific data, social network data, geographical data, legal data, and so forth. The JDC is being used to catalyze collaborative projects within the network, as well as to support instruction and mentoring of early career scholars in quantitative and cloud-based analyses. And the JDC is part of the HEAL data ecosystem, interoperating fully with the HEAL data platform. And you will hear more about the HEAL data platform in another presentation during this meeting.
Last presentation, we're going to, it's 12 labors, developing a clinical translation platform. So why don't we start that now?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present some of our work at the Auckland Bioengineering Institute. So over the past 20 years, the Auckland Bioengineering Institute has been driving the Physium project, which aims to provide an integrative systems medicine framework based on computational physiology to help link structure and function across multiple spatial and temporal scales, all the way from the cell level to the whole body level. And our aim here is to be able to create digital twins that will allow us to provide a mechanistic understanding of how diseases that operate at a molecular scale influence physiological function at the whole body scale. Now, as part of these developments, our research teams at the Auckland Bioengineering Institute have been developing these clinical workflows. So these are workflows aimed at assisting clinicians with diagnosis and treatment of different diseases. For example, here's one of these examples of a workflow that analyzes cardiac MRI images, builds computational models, and uses these to derive new biomarkers. For example, the stiffness of the heart wall to help with early diagnosis of heart failure. Here is another workflow that's looking at how we can use, we can build models from breast MRI and use computational models to predict where the breast tissues move and where subsequently where tumors within the breast would move during breast cancer treatment procedures. This workflow in particular has had quite a bit of development, and it's at the stage where it's completely automated. And also we have a prototype of this workflow implemented at Auckland City Hospital in New Zealand. So the aim of the 12 Labors project is to facilitate integration of all the sort of efforts as part of that, as part of the Physium project, and look at how we can start translating some of these computational modeling tools. So the 12 Labors project is a 5-year project, and we're now currently coming to the end of the 2nd year. And it involves developing 3 technology platforms. The first platform is looking at further development of these digital twins. The second platform is looking at how we can personalize these digital twins from clinical measurements to assist with clinical healthcare applications. The third platform is looking at integrating implantable and wearable devices, information from these devices, to further personalize these models to enable continuous monitoring, and that will also enable home-based healthcare. So alongside these platforms, we're also developing 3 exemplar projects that are going to be used to demonstrate the benefits of these of the technology platforms that we're building. Now, I won't go into the details here, but if you're interested, you can Google search 12 Labor Seminar Series, and it'll give you some of the latest updates on this research. So this talk will be on 12 Labors, the platform 2. So here's our team. It's a transdisciplinary team of researchers, clinicians, and community engagement specialists. And we collaborate with a number of organizations. So I really like to take this opportunity to also thank Nessie, who's been providing us a lot of guidance and support in developing some of the platforms which I'll present. So what we're really aiming to do here is develop, one of the things we're doing is developing a clinical translation platform. And the idea here is that we want to be able to obtain patient-specific measurements alongside accessing existing computational physiology models and workflow descriptions. And we want to be able to build these workflows that will allow us to personalize the computational models using these patient-specific measurements. Now, we don't want to only do this for one workflow. We want to be able to do this across multiple workflows that are being built at the Auckland Bioengineering Institute across all the different organ systems. And what we want to do is integrate the outputs of these to create a digital twin. So vision here is to create this platform that allows us to link data from the hospital, existing databases, and existing model repositories, and be able to store that in a harmonized database, which we can then access in a standard manner from model personalization workflows, such as, for example, the breast workflow that I presented earlier. And so what we can then do is look at how we can integrate the outputs of these workflows to create these personalized digital twins and be able to present this information within a portal that we can make accessible within the hospital, so that we can work with clinicians to perform clinical trials to demonstrate the efficacy of these workflows. So our focus really is on these four key elements of the platform. And the real novelty here is being able to create these personalized digital twins. What we really need to be able to do is automate this process of being able to run these models, access data, run models, and generate digital twins. We also want to be able to return the results from these models back into our database. And we also need to consider how we can store data onshore to meet our data sovereignty requirements. So what we aim to really do here is reuse some of the really great work that's already being developed in terms of platforms, infrastructure, and tools. And this is why we're really interested in the Gen3 Data Commons. It's an extremely useful tool. And so we're really keen to try and collaborate with you and try and make use of this in our in this platform. The other project we're also trying to the tools we're trying to use is also from the Spark project, which is a project that the ABI contributes to. So in terms of how we're trying to make use of these tools, so from our workflows, what we've been doing is developing ways where we can store the data from these in a standardized data set structure. So in this case, we're using the Spark data set structure that adheres to FAIR principles. And what we've done is we've been able to map this to map data that comes out of a workflow into a custom data dictionary as part of a Gen3 Data Commons. So what we've been doing at the moment is implementing a prototype of this platform, which is making use of publicly accessible data. And in this case, it's data from the Cancer Imaging Archive, specifically a breast imaging data set from Duke University. And what we're doing here is we can access the MRI images of the breast, and we can input that into the platform, into a specific workflow, and we can trigger the workflow to perform the simulations and export results in the Spark dataset structure, which we can then import back into the Gen3 Data Commons. And what we've also done is being able to look back into the database and pull information to be able to present results from the workflow. What we're aiming to do moving forward is to be able to link in computational models and workflow descriptions, and also develop the 12 labors a 12 labels portal, which is currently one of the things that we're working on. And we also want to use the standards from the GA4GH to be able to connect to existing platforms. So all the really great platforms that are being developed by the community here, and also be able to access clinical information from hospital systems. And what we're really looking forward to is building a collaboration here so we can see how we can sort of start working together on some of these efforts. That would be really great. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. We're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll come back in about 10 minutes, just after 15 minutes after the hour. And in the last session, I'm going to give a brief roadmap, and then we'll have about a 40-minute discussion, an interactive discussion, and it's wide open for anything today. So if you have questions about some of the things you heard, feel free to bring them up in the discussion also. So let's reconvene in about 10 minutes. So that you can get better understanding of the Gen3 roadmap and participate in shaping the roadmap. And that's one of the important outcomes, as Stephen showed, that we really want to work out methods through starting in with this workshop of how to engage with the community and help work with the community to help shape the roadmap. We've the main source is gen3.org for building Gen3 data platform, Gen3 data commons and data meshes. You've seen some of these. A lot of the commons we heard about today are not on this dashboard. So I think one of the things we might do is figure out how to create dashboards that highlight the organizations that are building these and some of the core components of the different commons that we've heard about today. So I'm going to give just a very short 10-minute introduction to Gen3 through 5 key concepts. So the first concept is, the philosophy of Gen3 is define a data model, and then the data model will auto-generate a commons with the required APIs to access the data and have the data be fair, to submit data, and it will also come up with a portal and with some existing workspaces. And so concept 1 is you define a data model and that auto generates a commons. Concept 2 is, it can be easy to to miss the fact that there are 3 types of data that are supported by the Gen3 commons and meshes. One are data objects, which are S3 compatible objects that are fair because they have GUIDs, they have metadata, they have access methods. It's compatible with some of the GA4GH standards, and the data object can be open or controlled. The second type of data is semi-structured data. So we can have arbitrary JSON objects associated with the data object, but we can also have arbitrary JSON data associated with a non-materialized object, such as a subject or an entity. And so in this way, we can have arbitrary semi-structured data that's part of both a commons and a mesh. I won't go into details, but you can therefore have these entities such as patients that, or subjects or entities that are available in a mesh structure and linked to data in multiple commons. And then each commons itself can work with structured data through a graph data model. And as you'll see in the roadmap, we saw an example of the OMOP data model, but they can also work with structured data. FHIR is going to be in the roadmap, and we're going to hear a little bit in the roadmap about some tools to version different versions of structured data. And in the roadmap, we'll also hear about supporting multiple data models. Right now, a serious limitation of Gen3 is there could only be one data model. And so it's important to support multiple data models for many of these applications. So the first concept was auto generation from a data model. The second is we support for objects, semi-structured data, and structured data. The third, and we've talked a little bit about this, but this is the so-called end-to-end design philosophy, which is it powered the internet. It meant that the internet is based on a small number of core services like TCP and similar services like that. And you can add new data types like continuous media. You could add new applications like all sorts of multimedia players and visual browsers that weren't part of the original internet, and all the protocols for data and for sessions, et cetera, don't require that you change any of the routers or switches along the way, because everything is built over a small core number of services, yet you can add new inputs and get new applications. And that's the philosophy of Gen3 data commons and meshes. So we have a very, very limited number of mesh services. There's authentication, authorization, indexing, metadata, data access, a policy engine, a requester service. But the idea is that these are small and everything's built over them. There really weren't Jupyter notebooks when we started, yet we didn't have to change the architecture to support Jupyter notebooks. I think there are going to be all sorts of interesting applications coming. And I think this kind of narrow middle or end-to-end system design with a handful of services will serve us well. And importantly, these are designed both for data commons and collections of commons and other computational resources and services in the cloud. So the mesh services are designed to link everything together. The fourth concept I've talked quite a bit about is a few years ago, Gen3 started supporting not just single commons, but collections of commons in a hybrid governance structure called a mesh, in which each of the entities in the mesh has governance. There's shared governance for the mesh services. And so there's a hybrid governance structure, which allows scalability in interesting ways. And so now Gen3 has commons, meshes, mesh services, workspaces, and other services we'll be talking about. That's key concept 4. Key concept 5 is for most of you out there, you operate one or more commons or meshes, and so you're aware of that. There's a lot that happens, and so key concept 5 is this notion of an ops center for data commons and data meshes and open source software to support the ops center. And so there's the activity around the open source software, and that includes not only commons, mesh services, meshes, workspaces. We're bringing out something called the front end framework that is going to make it easier to have front ends for Gen 3. Hopefully, we come out in the first quarter with testing in the fourth quarter. But there's the software, the operations center, and then you configure a commons through the operations center or manually, depending upon how you do this. There's data ops to load data into the commons, SecOps, DevSecOps to put your security perimeters around, platform engineering to operate the commons through the operations center. So, you know, and then the science takes place, you know, once the data is in these structures. So the fifth concept is, you know, how do you operate these? What's the open source software? And I think we're going to hear about some work. You know, it's not easy. A lot of Gen 3 is a number of years old now, and significant work was done on Helm charts to make it much easier for people to bring up Gen 3 and to bring them up on their laptops and stuff, and we'll hear about that. I'm going to briefly mention some roadmap activities, then we'll break into this discussion. The portable format for biomedical data is an Avro-based format that encapsulates the data model, generally pointers to controlled vocabularies, so that the data model, the third-party references are all packaged together in an industry standard format, Avro. And we're going to be making it easier to export projects and commons into PFB, into this Avro framework, put it into a data lake, version it with the mesh services, IndexD, which supports versioning, and assign GUID to it so that the bulk structured data is now fair, and then there'll be processes to search over that at scale. And so this will allow you to support multiple models, versions of bulk structured data. And the reason I'm talking about some of these is, you know, we're actively looking for people who could help co-develop this with us. There's going to be a workflow execution service. I know there are a number of cloud native workflow execution services out there, and there'll be more, but we're going to have a sort of a Gen 3 agnostic way to interface to workflow execution services that comes with Gen 3 and is compliant with WES. And we'll be supporting things like Argo and Nextflow and other workflows with this. We're going to be supporting federated machine learning out of the box with Gen 3. And I've mentioned multiple database support. That's on the roadmap. We have OMOP, but we hope to make it easier to add native graph databases in Fire. Again, I know a number of you are working on this, and we sort of like collaboration on this. And I don't have a slide on the new Gen 3 front-end framework because it's a little further out, but hopefully we'll see bits and pieces of that in the fourth quarter and first quarter. So I want to end this by just talking about how important this community forum is to us. We, you know, the Gen 3 community are the people who use it no matter where they are. We have gen3.org that has the open source software and the documentation. You've heard a little bit about the Open Commons Consortium, occ-data.org. You know, we would love to bring into this community other governance organizations that want to help people build data commons and data meshes, because the governance is such a challenging part of it, as well as the security and compliance services. So if there are other organizations like like the Open Commons Consortium, please reach out to us. And then, we'll set up an ongoing process to have Gen3 community forums, probably a face-to-face each year and monthly meetings. Stephen is going to help will lead the discussions to help work this out on days 2 and 3. But it's up to this next 2 days to sort of figure out, how we build out together the community forum. So that's all I have. I want to leave plenty of time for discussion. That's why we're here today. So I have if particular questions come up, I have a lot of backup slides, but let me stop sharing now. Stephen, are you going to manage the questions?
Sure. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask, I guess either of Bob or also any of the other speakers that spoke over the last 2 hours that might still be here in the room, just raise your hand in Zoom and we'll come to you. So Bob, there was a starting question from Faye actually around how we see the WES future being built out.
I will, let's see, Alex or Michael Lukowski, is Michael on? I'm not sure. Alex, do you want to take that?
Yeah, the question was how we see the WES future. Is that right?
WES, yeah, GA4GH WES on the workflow execution service.
Yeah, so I mean the core of what we're building for the framework services and a lot of the new stuff is trying to align with open standards when they're available to promote interoperability, and it makes it easier to connect multiple places if they're all talking the same language. So GA4GH WES is going to be probably our target initial API that would be the interface into the workflow execution engine on the back end. So we may write translation layers between WES and other, we may that and whatever backends we end up using for workflow execution, whether that be Argo or Nextflow or both. But definitely WES is going to be, the primary, probably the first sort of open standard that we adopt for workflows, because it is something that is well defined by an international group, and it supports sort of the basic workflow execution that we need. Hopefully that answers the question.
Stephen will be running a process, but in day 3 we have certain breakout groups and we could add more. So if there's an interest in workflow integration, execution service integration, I mean, I think all of us do a lot of processing. I should say I didn't highlight it, but there's also going to be the use of Argo because it's Kubernetes native for data ingestion in Gen3. So for people running in production, improving the automation around data ingestion is really important, and we started to use Argo for that. Did that answer the question? Okay, let me see.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alex and Bob. There's another question in the chat from Claire Wright. Claire, do you want to ask in the Zoom if you're there?
Sure, thank you. So Claire Wright from Nessie. Lots to learn today, and it was great seeing so many other Gen3s. It's been really great talks. Thank you. I was sort of keen to have a bit of a data ingest angle and see how other groups did it, but also just find out if there was any sort of further refinement on the Gen3 roadmap from a data ingest perspective.
Yeah, it's a particular focus this quarter for a few of our projects. We have a system with a bad name called DERM, Data Ingestion, Integration, and Release Management. So we have a pretty standard process that if a third party fills a bucket with data objects and associated metadata, then there's some automation that will improve, but there's some automation that will ingest that into a commons, assign the GUIDs, assign the metadata, etc. And we routinely do that for, you know, hundreds of thousands to millions of objects. I'm not sure how easy it is for others to see that. Alex, is that easy to see in our projects or not?
We're working on making it easier. So our Gen3 software development kit and command line interface in Python exposes a lot of the automation that Bob's talking about. So if you go to our repository in GitHub for the Gen3 SDK, you'll find links to some of the tools that enable that kind of automation. But it is an active effort on our part to more, it's all kind of piecemeal automation. So the actual connection of the different steps is something that we're working on, which aligns kind of with the workflow execution work that we're doing too. You know, we intend to use a workflow execution pipeline, not only for end user and researcher workflows, but also for internal data ingests. And that design and sort of clarification of the steps and standardization of different options for data ingest is something that's actively being improved on. But, you know, if you want the latest and greatest, most of the automation is in the Gen3 SDK.
And I should just follow up, Claire. We are going to have monthly Zooms, I think. And, you know, a lot of the people we work with at the university say they don't have enough deadlines. So one thing we could do is, you know, to set up in a couple months an overview of how DERM works. And that will force us to do some of the documentation and other things to make it really easy. So I think one of the things we're looking to get out of this is, you know, what the community's priorities are. We have Biodata Catalyst, which I know a number of you on the phone are involved with. We use DERM actively there as well as our other projects, and we're adding capability. It's been it was on the roadmap for a long time to put together sort of structured data in a bucket and knit it together and ingest it into the Graph API. So that is on the roadmap, and it's not that hard. We just have to sort of get its priority up. Right now, the automation and data ingestion is around objects, but it's criminal that we don't have that for around you know, multiple flat files that have to be moved into a graph model, and that is on the roadmap. So if you're interested, I would suggest we, you know, maybe talk a little bit about this in a breakout session or sort of queue it up for a forum. But it is something that, as you operate these, is obviously very important. And there are a lot of SOPs and things we have, but it sounds like are not exposed as we need to do.
That's really awesome. Thank you. And I suspect we're a slightly maybe odd use case in that we tend to operate our Gen3s on metadata rather than a lot of the time the data structures or the data is held elsewhere. So actually it's possibly also the metadata ingest that's of particular interest to us. But yeah, this all sounds great. Thank you.
And if the data is held elsewhere, then the mesh, you know, ingestion to a mesh is something we're going to have to start to think about. The HEAL and BRH have that. And if you're ingesting to a mesh instead of a single place, well, there are two ways to look at this. If you have a central place with data held elsewhere, that there's one way to handle that. If you have a central place with multiple repositories, that's a little different. So we might want to dig into what your use case is and how best to manage that.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Bob. Next question in the Slack chat from Ankit, and maybe this is for Chris. If you're here, Chris is around. If there's an opportunity to connect more data commonses through the BRH data mesh or other data meshes, preserving data security and provenance, bringing more power for research and discovery.
Chris may have father responsibility. So so the BRH is an open mesh. And so if people want to add their systems in a mesh with a hybrid governance, that is, the resource being added has complete control of itself and complete control how it participates in the mesh, please reach out. It's a joint project with Amazon. Please reach out to Ankit from Amazon or myself, and we're actively interested in adding more and more resources to the BRH mesh. And it would be good, at the appropriate time, to have mesh resources that have regional restrictions, because that's part of the plan for this.
Thank you. Maybe we can revisit if Chris comes back in the meantime, but we can go to Andrew Loney.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Bob and everybody. Sorry, I can't seem to join Slack, which is why I'm doing this. This is maybe a naive question, but maybe other people are wondering it as well. What's the difference between a Gen3 with multiple data models and a data mesh?
Oh, that's a great question. So if you have a commons, my definition of commons, it's a governed resource to serve a research community. It's a data platform that's a governed resource to serve a research community. A commons with, right now, our Gen3 commons come up with a single model. That's for historical reasons, and because we auto generate, there's a lot of work. The PFP in a lake and related things is to support multiple data models within a commons. But that a commons which supports multiple data model is still serving one research community, still has one governance structure. The governance structure may be a little complicated because data may come from different places, but it's one governance structure, one research community. A mesh, if you look at that mesh I showed, there were data in cardiovascular, in cancer, in COVID, in infectious diseases, all managed by completely separate organizations, willing to work with other organizations on their terms, but not willing to share governance with the other organizations. So a mesh has multiple data models, but that's not what's going on. A mesh are separate entities, separate commons, or even separate meshes with their own individual governance that agree to have some degree of configurable interoperability through these core mesh services. So does that make sense? It's really a hybrid governance model where the organizations have almost all the governance, and there's light shared governance to with the mesh services. So when a researcher is authorized to work with data from two or more commons, or to do something across commons, that comes for free. So you can pull data from multiple commons, but they all may have very, very individual rules about what workspaces are authorized, what users are authorized, et cetera. That's a long explanation, but that was a great question. Does that help separate the two?
I think so. So, governance is key, obviously. At the software level, what do you think that means, if that's not an unfair question?
No, right now, yeah, it's, let me bring up a slide because I think it's a little easier So I have a complicated slide. A data commons exposes APIs for submitting data. It's in these RESTful APIs that support the data, the graph model. A mesh assumes that each entity in the mesh has APIs for authentication and authorization, APIs for metadata, and APIs for data. And then the mesh services, and there's I think I have a portal here. There's an aggregate metadata service that goes to all the metadata APIs in the mesh and pulls enough metadata to have a mesh browser, which sits outside of each of the individual entities in the mesh governance. Here's a picture of the, let's see here. There's a picture of the mesh browser and the mesh workspace. So you have a number of individual entities, each with their own governance, a little bit of shared governance, and then this is in the mesh governance area. These are in the individual governance areas, but all they do is expose data, metadata, and auth N, auth Z, which is quite different than a data commons. And when you look at how the security and compliance is done, where did that slide go? There's a security and compliance boundary on each of the platforms or other resources, a security and compliance boundary around the mesh or framework services, a security and compliance boundary around the portal, and a security and compliance boundary on the cloud platform that hosts workspaces, of which there might be several. And so this is hybrid governance, this is mesh governance, this is organizational governance. This is with NIST 853, a US standard, but at this level, it would apply for any of the corresponding international standards. That was probably too much information, but did that answer your question?
No, it's exactly the right amount of information. Thank you, Bob. Particularly pertinent to us here in Australia, because we're a bit more greenfields in this space, policy-wise and governance-wise, than perhaps the US equivalents are. So it was really that question was motivated by: do we start one Gen 3 or many for our different projects?
We should talk about that. There's an economy of efficiency if you run one ops center and start several. And they can each be governed separately. And on the other hand, there may be certain circumstances in which the ops center, the organizations want their own ops center. And so the mesh is flexible in that way, and we're going to be adding regional services to the mesh so that data will not leave the boundary. We have a proposal for that. That we'd like to work with this community on to for the data and the workspaces to expose enough metadata so that there could be matching when data has to stay within a particular enclave or a particular region.
Thanks for that. And very quickly, Brian, sorry, I could see you've got your hand up, but if I can just follow up then, where are multiple data models on the roadmap time-wise, do you think?
Well, 3 years too late for me. We're required to have them. We're starting working on it this quarter for Biodata Catalyst. We have to talk to Alex, but they're long overdue, and hopefully we finally found someone. Biodata Catalyst is helping funding some of that work. So we unfortunately can't do much if there's not one of our commons is interested in it. And now we have someone actively interested in it, so we're actively working on it.
Okay, thanks heaps. That's really useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Apologies, Brian. Just going to quickly go to a standing question in the Slack chat, and then we'll come back to you. So there's a question from Plumman around what's the co-development model between different Gen3 services, such as the UI portal and Gen3 microservice integration, and how does this feed into the overall architecture?
Well, that's a great question. Part of what's going to happen on day 3, I don't think there's a breakout on the code development model. OCC has been a co-developer. Australia is a co-developer in different projects. We really need to be thoughtful about that. Oregon is now a OHSU, where Brian and Kyle Elrod is a co-developer. I don't have a succinct answer. I just know we need, which is, Stephen, why we're partnering with you on this. You are a reasonable person to help us figure out a good co-development model. So I'm going to flip that back to you. We'll probably think about that on the 3rd day.
I think, yeah, that's definitely a 3rd day discussion to figure out how we work together over the next short, medium, long term. Brian, back to you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I just wanted to reemphasize the comments that were just brought up about. I think that was a great tagline: multiple data models or multiple meshes or whatever. We're dealing with exactly the same issues with ACE. You know, the wrinkle here is, yes, they can be using the metadata service to do basic discovery and application for access and things like that, and not needing a model. But we really need our cake and eat it too. We really need fungibility and dispersed housing of the data. I think we're going to be dealing with that, but we really need close cohort querying and things like that. So I just wanted to kind of, if there was one thing I got out of this, that would be the topic, you know, multiple data models or multiple meshes or whatever. You know, in my mind's eye, I see several slides, a project plan, who needs to do what in order to make that happen.
Brian, let's just start with multiple models within a single commons like PFP, which is PFP in the lake. Or is that active on your roadmap? Is that something we could actively collaborate on? Or
I believe so. All indications from the ACE lab members are the need to support multiple data models. You know, so my compromise right now is to use something like FHIR that's kind of a meta model, and you can, you know, use what you want out of it. But, you know, I think we've got some smart people here and putting some thoughts together around, is that the right approach, or what could be adapted from that versus the current metadata kind of discovery model? And
there's a metadata discovery model, and then there's multiple PFP based data models with single comment. So we should sort this out in terms of priorities. The metadata model is already there in a mesh, but that's probably not the right solution to have to bring up a separate commons, which is why we're doing PFP in a lake. If it's a requirement, you know, we have a funded project together, maybe we can prioritize, we could start that discussion and see who else, you know, in the community might sort of want to accelerate that with us.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you. I just wanted to kind of
well, that's why we're doing this.
On that. Yeah.
And, you know, we could make that on the short list for one of the monthly talks to make sure we get everyone's proper focus on that.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. We are almost at the end of our day one session. So I'm just going to take one more question from the Slack from Irby around, they say, about the analysis environment in Gen3, how can more analysis tools be onboarded into the Gen3 data commons?
Well, I'm talking too much. Alex, is that a question you can do?
I can certainly try. By analysis tools, it sort of depends on what they are. So at least the idea with the workflow execution engine, like something like Argo, the idea is that, we would probably support some amount of, pre-approved tools that you can use. So Docker images that you can connect to, you provide input, you get the output, you use a verified image. All of this, I should say, is actively in, design and thought. So this is something that, we can collaborate on to make sure that we end up with something that you feel is usable. If you're running the Gen3 instance and want to provide different images to someone, I mean, we do have the service that supports our Jupyter workspaces. You can theoretically connect different images to that. So, we have examples where we're doing other things other than just, simple Jupyter notebooks. We've got RStudio and, we can have saved notebooks and other things. So that you can do today. But if you want to do something that's more along a pipeline, that's, kind of what's actively in the works. I know that's not a great answer, but.
And Alex, let me add to that. They may also mean sort of like the map analysis and some of the front-end analysis tools, and that's the role of the Gen3 front-end framework, which was supposed to be here in the fall, but it's delayed a quarter. So that's another way that that people may imagine analysis tools, like the interactive tools that some of the comments have done, like putting a genome browser in there, or a DICOM view or something, which is a bit of a problem now, but will be easier with the front-end framework. We're at time, so Stephen, you get the wrap-up role.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for your questions. Please, even over the next, between now and tomorrow, if you think of more questions, please just type them into the Slack channel. I realize we didn't get to every question, but we do have time both at the end of day 2 and the end of day 3 for, and obviously through the breakout sessions on day 3 to explore some of these areas in more detail. I just wanted to do a bit more of a bit of a wrap up and some closing remarks on today's meeting. So I'll just kick off with some closing remarks, and I think, like all of us, we all learned a lot possibly around Gen3 that we didn't know about before. Certainly the intention today was to do two things. One was to showcase a huge diverse set of challenges and use cases. And the second one was really to give some airtime to the roadmap and to the plans and to the structure of Gen3, which again is the community forum is designed to be able to give us an opportunity to present this to the community, to old users and new users. So I think that there's really a range of topics I just wanted to quickly go through. I think a really big thing that came out today was that there's actually a huge range of challenges that have emerged. And they're actually really cool societal challenges. There's pediatric cancer, drug addiction, and abuse research, cardiovascular disease, veterans, inflammatory bowel disease. These are all huge societal health issues, and they're all being resolved or helped through commonses, and specifically through Gen3. And I think that came out for me in a really big way today. There's a lot of diversity in everything that we've seen here. There's diversity in data models. There's diversity in deployments, such as the OpenStack-based deployment in New Zealand, which has a very strong Indigenous co-design aspect. And there's also a big diversity in sophistication and where everyone is at in terms of their journey, whether they're at the beginning of their Gen 3 development and operational journey, or they've been at it for a number of years and very experienced. Creativity came out a lot for me. Creativity is something that possibly doesn't get used a lot as a word around data commonses and data, but there's certainly a lot of creativity and innovation that was evident today in how Gen 3 is being deployed and used, but also extra innovations beyond the generic Gen 3 stack that are being applied at a local level, and you know, figuring out how those things can eventually make themselves make their way back into Gen 3 main is going to be important. Integration and interoperability was a big theme. You know, Gen 3 interoperating and talking to and working with a range of platforms and analysis tools, either very directly or very loosely through things like the mesh mechanism, and also being able to bring third-party applications like the Midrick DICOM viewer in are super powerful applications. And I think particularly for us from the Oz side, really kind of gets us thinking about the possibilities of what we can do here. Data harmonization is a key thing for everyone. It goes without saying that this was absolutely central to making these multi-study, multi-data set things actually work. And you know, and that's either going to happen through data harmonization directly or through more loosely coupled mechanisms like BRH and other FAIR mechanisms. Community was a big word that jumped out at me. You know, we behind all these commons were a community of benefactors, of end people that are going to see the results, whole populations and communities, in fact, that are being helped through this platform. But then we also have us here and others, the community of operators and developers and users, and ultimately, you know, community input and user needs. For example, like the study explorer in ACDC or other requirements like fine-grained access control. These are all things we want to work together on, and they're going to be community-driven innovations where we can work together with Gen 3 to ultimately make the product and the outcomes more usable, more useful, more applicable. And of course, even processes like the automatic governance of the OCC, taking the pain out of legals and common processes, are equally important in kind of being able to deploy and utilize Gen 3s securely and effectively. And there's also new needs, which we're no doubt going to talk about more in the next 2 days. And these have started to emerge today, which is great in some talks that we've heard. I just wanted to quickly, before we close up, just talk about day 2 to give you all a sense of what you can expect. So we're going to kick off first thing with the Gen 3 community panel. I'll be moderating that session, and we've got 5 great panelists from across New Zealand and the US. And we're going to be talking about how can we build a very, basically an excellent and effective Gen 3 global community. So we're going to be focusing on that question. We'll be having a discussion, but there'll be plenty of time given to all of you as the audience and participants to ask questions and engage in that panel discussion. And then we'll have a break and we'll move on to some longer presentations from 3 Gen 3 exemplars. And we'll also make sure we include time around those 3 examples for questions and discussions. And again, we'll finish up with a bit of a review of the day before we close, and then eventually move into day 3 on our final day. So I wanted to thank everyone who put their heart and time into those videos today that were presented earlier. And thank you very much, Bob, for your roadmap, and thank you everyone for your questions. And thank you also to all of the operators in the back end making this go smoothly. So thanks everyone, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow for day 2.